Most investors chase cities during the boom times, but the real money is made in markets that thrive during normal economies. And here's the deal. Fort Worth doesn't really need perfection, it just needs what it already has. That's 5 compounding advantages most cities lost decades ago. So today I'm breaking down exactly why Fort Worth keeps winning when other cities seem to struggle and what that means for the next 5 years. All right, so let's go with reason number 1, which is Fort Worth is a corporate magnet. Fort Worth doesn't really freak out whenever one industry slows down, and that's a big difference. The market isn't really built on one trend or one lucky break. It's not all tech. It's not all tourism, and it doesn't only work when everything lines up perfectly. So Fort Worth runs on a bunch of engines at the same time. When one eases off, the other one keeps thriving and moving on, and that balance is why this market stays steady while other cities swing up and down. To understand why Fort Worth keeps growing, you have to start with the business side of it. When a big company moves to Fort Worth, it's not just like a building that's changing addresses. It brings people, and usually a lot of them. From 2018 to 2024, DFW consistently ranked among the top U.S. markets for corporate headquarter relocations, with dozens of companies moving here. We're talking about companies moving their headquarters or shifting significant operations, and that's not really random. That's more of a trend right now. These aren't just basic jobs. These are companies that bring executives, managers, engineers, professionals who need housing right away. These are people that have real paychecks, they're relocating for work, and it doesn't matter whether mortgages are 3% or 7%, they still need somewhere to live. So we're talking about companies like Charles Schwab. You got AECOM, McKesson, CBRE, Yum Brands, KFC just announced their move here. Pizza Hut operations is in Westlake. So they didn't just come here on a gamble. They came because Fort Worth makes it easier to operate. You got lower cost, no state income tax, and a business environment that lets companies grow without jumping through hoops. It doesn't stop at the headquarters. If you look around the Metroplex, Westlake has Charles Schwab. It's their global headquarters, thousands of employees. Then you have Fidelity Investments. Southlake has major operations from T-Mobile, Sabre, and a much longer roster of corporate offices and regional hubs. The Alliance Corridor still anchors the northern side with tens of thousands of technology and logistic workers spread across major employers, and that steady built-in demand for housing across the entire area. Later on, I'll explain why Fort Worth can keep absorbing all this growth without prices and infrastructure breaking the way they do in other cities. So stick with me for that. But this is why Fort Worth doesn't act like a boom and bust market. Even when parts of the economy cool off, people keep moving here for work. And those jobs create entire ecosystems. You've got suppliers that follow, service companies that follow, families that follow. If you're relocating, this matters because your job options aren't just hanging on by a thread. If you're investing, it matters because tenants here have stable incomes, not like just a shaky one-off or seasonal work. That's how long-term stability can really get built. But strong companies alone are not necessarily enough. You also need roads, you need space, you need infrastructure that supports that growth, and that's where Fort Worth really separates itself. Before we jump into that, if you're evaluating Fort Worth seriously, whether you're relocating for work or looking possibly at investment potential, we work with buyers and investors in this market every single day and can show you what's actually available versus what you're reading online. By the way, my name's Sean. My business partner, Mindy, and I have been in this market and we work it every single day. So reach out. All of our information is below and in the description or on the screen. All right, so we look at reason number 2 is because the DFW Airport is really this economic beast when you think about it. Here's something people outside of Fort Worth really underestimate. Think about running a national company from a city where every trip needs a layover. Austin, that gets pretty old fast. Fort Worth doesn't have that problem. The Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport is one of the busiest airports in the world, and it ranks as the third busiest globally by both passenger traffic and aircraft operations. What really matters though is how easy is it to travel? So if you've got nonstop flights to over 190 cities in the US and 79 international destinations, that means you can get almost anywhere that matters with just one flight and no bouncing through hubs. No long extended days or wasted days. And that matters a lot more than people think. When companies decide to relocate here, they're not just looking at taxes and real estate prices, they're thinking about how easy is it for executives to travel? How fast can teams meet with clients and how smoothly can they move people in products? The DFW Airport checks all those boxes. The airport itself adds about $78 billion a year to the North Texas economy and supports over 684,000 jobs. That's not just airport workers, that's logistics companies, distribution centers, corporate offices, entire industries that exist because Fort Worth is easy to get in and out of. Plus, we're centrally located. American Airlines runs its large hub right here with more than 930 flights a day at peak operation. If you're running a national or global operation, that's a pretty big deal. Being based in Fort Worth means you're always one flight away from wherever you really need to be. In a minute, I'll break down the cost of this and why Texas still wins financially, even with the higher property taxes. But the math surprises a lot of people. First, there's another piece that people typically miss. Cities with strong airports tend to bounce back faster when the economy slows. Companies choose to stay and grow where everything really runs smoothly. Professionals choose cities where travel isn't a headache. The DFW Airport quietly puts Fort Worth at the top of that list. The airport is not standing still. Terminal F is already in the works, adding 15 more gates in 2027. That's why areas like Euless and Grapevine and Hearst keep seeing strong demand. Being close to DFW Airport matters, especially for professionals with strong incomes. That travel advantage isn't going anywhere, and it sets Fort Worth up for something even more important because a great infrastructure only works if a city can actually grow around it. And that's really where Fort Worth has another edge most cities lost a long time ago. That brings us to reason number 3, which Fort Worth has room to absorb the growth without breaking. This is another big reason that Fort Worth kind of behaves differently than a lot of other cities. Some places simply run out of room. You look at Austin, you hit hills and water limits. San Francisco hits the bay. New York is on an island. Fort Worth doesn't have that problem. Fort Worth can keep growing outward, and it can do it for a long time. More importantly, it grows in a planned way. So it's not like random sprawl. You've got planned out roads, schools, shopping, and housing that are all built together instead of chasing each other, after the fact. If you look at places like Harvest, Treeline, and the Alliance Corridor, they're master plan communities with growth in mind. Argyle and Northwest ISD add thousands of students every year, and that's what they're planning for. That's what they expect. Schools are planned years out. Roads are laid out before traffic becomes a nightmare. The scale of development here is massive. In Harvest, the farm-to-table lifestyle is a huge master plan community over 1,200 acres, expected to be worth billions once it's finished. That is actually crazy when you think about it. But it includes private gardens, which is opening in the summer of 2026. Homes range in the low 7s to 900s to well over 2 million. They're going to have offices, retail, entertainment, golf, everything in that community that you could need. And then across town, you've got Old Town Grapevine, the historic Main Street district, which is a multi-billion-dollar destination that's bringing 3,000 apartments and condos, has about 2 million square feet of fixed-use office space. So Fort Worth is really adding housing without choking itself. This really matters because when cities can't handle growth, prices typically explode and the infrastructure can fall apart. Austin is a great example of this. The demand keeps coming in, but the land is limited, so prices jump faster than incomes can keep up. So you see a lot of spikes and a lot of drawdowns with Austin where Fort Worth doesn't hit that wall as quickly because it can keep expanding in a more controlled way. This growth isn't cheap or sloppy. Master plan communities add real value. You look at Harvest in Northlake, it's got a working farm, resort pools, coffee shops, over 100 events every year. Homes there sit within the low 900s and above. You got Treeline that's also ingested. So they've got gated sections, trail systems, resort style amenities. The development quality here rivals what you'd see in established luxury markets. Then you got something like Argyle with large lots on 1 to 2 acre parcels, and that continues to see a lot of strong demand. But that's kind of the beauty of the planned supply meeting the market. You've got strong demand meeting planned supply. If you're a family, this kind of growth means schools and roads aren't constantly playing catch up. If you're investing, it means that there's enough new homes to keep prices steady, but not so many that values fall apart. Fort Worth grows wide, steady, and on purpose. And that's a big reason this market holds together while others strain under their own success. That brings us to reason 4, which is Texas can still win on the cost structure. This is one of the biggest reasons Fort Worth keeps pulling people in. It's honestly really simple. The math just works better here. If you start with taxes, because that's where most people feel it first, California's top state income tax rate is over 13% for the highest earners. New York is around 11%. Texas is 0. So that's not some small perk. That could easily save you tens of thousands of dollars, especially based on your income if you're in the 6-figure range and above. That doesn't just benefit the individuals. Texas doesn't have a corporate income tax either. So that's a huge reason companies keep moving here. Of course, lower costs make it easier to grow. Higher pay without everything getting eaten up by taxes. And that's why jobs keep coming, and jobs are what really support housing long term. If we want to be real about the trade-offs, property taxes in Tarrant County run around 1.7%, which is higher than the national average. So on a $500,000 home, that's roughly $8,600 a year in taxes. Nobody likes that, but this is the part where people forget to compare. When you stack that against not paying state income tax, most people still come out ahead. The math still favors Fort Worth. Housing prices matter too. Even with prices going up, Fort Worth is still way more affordable than the coastal cities. Austin, median home prices in Austin are in the low to mid 400s. San Francisco is about 200 to 300% more expensive, 3 to 4 times higher. New York and Los Angeles have similar prices to San Francisco, around 200 to 300% higher than Fort Worth. So, I mean, that's a lot. Even in Austin, it's 20% higher than Fort Worth, even in those areas. So some suburbs have climbed. Keller sits around 500,000. Southlake is mostly in the mid to high 6s, and it stays vibrant with an annual outdoor event like the Art in the Square, Oktoberfest, the Stars and Stripes for the Independence and fireworks. Westlake is in the low to mid 900s. But those prices didn't really come out of nowhere. They're backed by real jobs, real companies, real people moving in here, not really hyper speculation. So when I say Texas can still win on cost, I'm not saying Fort Worth is cheap. I'm saying the value still makes sense. And you get more house, you keep more of your income, and you have access to real job opportunities. So that combination is why people keep choosing Fort Worth. Of course, over time, that adds up. A few years of tax savings can turn into a nice down payment or retirement money, or just some breathing room financially. That's something a lot of other markets can't offer anymore. But I do want to show you the final piece that ties all this together and explain why Fort Worth doesn't just survive tough markets. It can keep moving forward straight through them. That's reason number 5, which Fort Worth strives really in normal economies. Here's something Fort Worth does really well that most cities don't, is it doesn't need everything going perfectly to keep moving forward. When tech slows down, When oil prices drop, when travel cools off, a lot of cities feel that really fast. Fort Worth doesn't, because it's never really relied on just one thing. It's not just a pure tech company. It's not driven by tourism. It's not tied to just energy and oil. It runs on a mix of those industries. So when one eases up, the others keep things steady. And that balance is an advantage. Fort Worth works best in a normal, boring economy. You got steady jobs, steady growth, no real hype required. Tech, healthcare, finance, transportation, corporate headquarters, energy, retail. It's everything happening all at the same time. If one area slows, the whole city doesn't just stall out. When you zoom out and look at who's actually here, it starts to make more sense. Fort Worth is home to 21 Fortune 500 headquarters. So you've got companies like American Airlines, Southwest Airlines, Texas Instruments, McKesson, CBRE, all very different businesses, all operating in the same metroplex, the same economy. This mix is exactly why this market holds up when others don't. So then you layer in places like Southlake and Westlake, where tens of thousands of people work in finance and software, cloud services related in tech fields. UT Southwestern employs over 25,000 care workers on its own, and it drives major medical research. Charles Schwab has more than 15,000 employees in Westlake. None of that depends on a single trend or kind of staying hot. That's why Fort Worth plays the long game. It's not always the flashiest market when everything's booming, but it's also not the one that falls apart when things cool off. It stays steady, and steady wins the race, right? Slow and steady wins the race. Everybody remembers that. If you're looking ahead, Fort Worth is expecting about 1 to 1.3% job growth for 2026. So that's not wild growth, but it's consistent. And its consistency is what actually builds wealth long term. Between 2023 and 2024 alone, the region added 178,000 new residents. That came from people moving in, companies relocating, and some international growth all happening together. Fort Worth doesn't really depend on crazy price jumps to keep working. It depends on real people with real jobs needing real places to live. Buyers who invested here 5 years ago didn't just benefit from appreciation, they benefited from a strong demand and fewer vacancies. Compare that to markets like Miami or Austin, and those places are usually considered a lot more exciting, but they're also way more sensitive. They need everything to line up right. Fort Worth doesn't. It just needs normal conditions. Over the next 5 years, normal looks like steady jobs, moderate rates, and companies that continue to choose cities where they can do business. That's why I really feel good about Fort Worth long term. Not because I think it's going to explode overnight, but because it's built to hold up even when the growth slows. But the jobs are spread out. The infrastructure is there. The housing market is supported by real demand, not speculation. So whether you're a salaried professional, a business owner, an investor, that mix of risk spreads things out, right? One industry having a rough year doesn't knock everything else over. Here's the part that really most people miss. All of these advantages stack on top of each other. When companies move here, airport traffic goes up. That kind of connectivity pulls in even more businesses. Because Fort Worth has room to grow, prices don't spiral the way they do in boxed-in cities. Of course, lower taxes help companies stay competitive. When the economy hits sometimes a rough patch, that balance keeps the whole thing from tipping over. That's a city designed to keep moving forward when conditions aren't perfect. None of this stuff is temporary though, right? It's just how Fort Worth operates. While most people are waiting for the perfect moment, Fort Worth just keeps performing in a normal, everyday market. So if you're ready to explore specific neighborhoods or investment opportunities in Fort Worth before the next wave of corporate relocations hit, shoot me an email or send me a text. All my information is below or on the screen. We can also schedule a Zoom. Thank you for watching.